just to make sure.
Good morning. I want to welcome everybody today and our online viewers at home. I'd like to introduce Claire Gillespie and Joe Erickson. Many of you may already know her because know them because they've been active in this church for many years. Both of them have been elders on the session here at First Presbyterian Church, and Claire was also the clerk of the session, and they can tell you more about that experience too. So today they are going to give us a little Session 101 class on the responsibilities of the session and how decisions get made in our church. So I'm turning it over to Claire and Joe.
So, excuse me, it struck me as I was preparing for this class that the last two adult ed sessions have been outside the church. The Link and last week the police chief and Dennis, his father, and that's so important and so interesting. This is much about the interior of our church, and that's important also. So I hope you find it interesting. Many of you will know much of this. If you look at the handout we passed out and look at page 1, the one that starts with Presbyterian Church USA on the top, I just wanted to give a quick overview of our denomination. We are a connectional church. We are connected to a nationwide denomination, and our structure within this congregation follows the structure of the overall church. So we are called the Presbyterian Church USA. The top of the podium, whatever, is the General Assembly, usually called GA, which is headquartered in Louisville, Kentucky. The officers there are a stated clerk, whose name right now is, the man right now is J. Herbert Nelson. He's a fascinating, impressive man. In a previous life, at a previous church, I was members of Presbyterian Association of Musicians and went to a conference of that group, and he preached at one of the worship services there. Fabulous preacher, really impressive, interesting man. So we are led right now by a really good man. That position is a paid position and semi-permanent. He is re-elected at some point, and Pat probably knows how often, maybe Cal does too, but I'm not quite sure. And then there are elected moderators. GA, General Assembly, meets every other year, a national assembly. A few years ago it was up in Minneapolis, and Tacey Braithwaite was one of the attendees, and I volunteered up there because our daughter lives in Minneapolis and it was convenient for me to be up there. They meet every other year, and each time they meet they elect a moderator. In recent years it's been co-moderators. The co-moderators this year are Gregory Bentley and Ilona Street Stewart. And interestingly enough, Ilona Street Stewart is from Minneapolis or St. Paul, somewhere up in the Twin Cities. The first GA met in 1789 in Philadelphia. We are an old denomination. We split during the Civil War and then reunited in 1983, which is about the time Paul and I became Presbyterian, actually. Paul was raised in the Methodist Church and I was raised in the Reformed Church in America. So I'm proud to be part of the PCUSA. The next level down is the Synod. Our Synod is the Synod of Lakes and Prairies, which is headquartered in St. Paul. There's a Synod exec, who is Ilona Street Stewart, one of the co-moderators of GA for this period. And then there are elected moderators, and one of those right now is Janice Palmer. If you have been in Presbyterian circles for a while in this state, Janice Palmer is one of the pastor in this state. So we are connected here from South Dakota, from our Synod, all the way up to General Assembly. I looked on the Synod of Lakes and Prairies website, and that's where I found their mission. General Assembly offices head up things like Presbyterian Mission, Presbyterian Disaster Assistance, some of those overall nationwide stretching into the world things. I wasn't as clear what the Synod did. I knew they offered assistance to people and had skills, but I liked their mission, which helped me understand. You can read it, I won't read it to you, but basically they provide expertise and services. I'm fogging up a little bit, sorry about that. And I was going to take that off while I talked and I forgot that. I believe right now the Synod is helping our presbytery with some financial issues or some payroll issues or something like that. I haven't been to a presbytery meeting for a while because of COVID. So, but that's the synod level. The next level down is the presbyteries, and we are the Presbytery of South Dakota. Not every presbytery is a state. The state of Iowa has more than one presbytery. Out in Pittsburgh, where Nate comes from originally, they have like 5 or 6 presbyteries just in the city, the metropolitan statistical area. It sort of depends on how many Presbyterians there are in the area. So our presbytery is a Presbytery of South Dakota, which headquarters here in Sioux Falls. Our exec is a mission coordinator and a stated clerk. That's one person. Right now that's Kevin Veldhuisen. And he is assisted in the office by our own Cindy Bailey. She is there daily. Kevin is not in the office every day. And then there are elected moderators at the presbytery level also. And the presbytery meets 3 times a year. One of those meetings is usually a Friday afternoon into a Saturday, so that people that have to travel have the morning and the afternoon to travel. We're a large regional presbytery, so some people have to travel a long distance. The meetings are here in Sioux Falls. People come all the way from Spearfish, Belle Fourche, way out there. So, and vice versa if we have to go out there. And then the next level down is us, congregations. And we are governed by a body, 3 bodies called the sessions and the deacons, the trustees. Not very many churches have board of trustees anymore. Our daughter's church up in Minneapolis does. They're a very large urban church and have had a board of trustees for a long time. This church did sometime in the past. I didn't go back and look when, but sometime in the past we did. And then session is moderated by the pastor. Any questions about that quick overview of our larger denomination? Great. Okay, so if you turn it over, this is an organizational chart of our church, our congregation, and pretty much any PCUSA church. As I've said before, there's a board of sessions and the board of deacons, and then the board of trustees. Board of trustees is in parentheses because we do not have one. The pastors moderate the session. In our case, Nate moderates, head of staff moderates. If Nate were not able to be there for some reason, he would most likely ask Pat to moderate. If a church is without a pastor, then presbytery appoints a pastor from within the presbytery to moderate the session. Session must be moderated by a pastor. Session is composed of elders. I believe Joe is going to talk about how those elders are chosen and elected and all of that. Once you're an elder, you stay an elder. So that's just and same with the deacon. And then underneath that, I have listed the session teams and deacons teams as I could think of them and as Paul could think of them. If I've missed a team, I'm sorry. Those are the teams that sort of are organized under the session or the deacons. Nominating team is in parentheses. Joe will talk about that later. Any questions on that? Okay. We're going to call in what we decided to call a color commentator to talk a little bit about the history of our particular session. My husband Paul was on session and a member of the vision team during some of the transitional time not too long ago.
Color commentary. Okay.
In black and white, yeah.
Black and white, what can I say? So I came on to our session when we were in the interim after Pastor Barry. So Joe Smith was here as the pastor at that time, as a interim pastor. And I came on to the vision team. And so one of the first things that we were actually given to do was to write a mission statement, because we needed it for the church information form that's part of the pastor nominating process. Before you can start calling pastors or any of that kind of work, you have to first write a whole a profile of the congregation, and a part of that is your mission statement. And one had not been written for years and years and years and years and years. So that was our first job. When I came on, Jason Dauma had just gone off, and he had been head of the vision team. Asked him to stay on as part of the vision team with some other members. And then Jason, in his wondrous way that he can write, took the ideas and stuff that we came up with, and for the most part, the mission statement that we have today was written by Jason Dauma with input from the rest of us. Jason's something else.
Yeah.
So we presented that back to session, and then that got incorporated into the call committee into what they put together for the church information form. Session at that time was 18. I had been on session in the other churches that we belonged to over the years, and our session wasn't really a lot different than the rest of them. If you were on session, then you were also on the property team, or you were on finance, or you were on mission, and helped with those teams. And with the size of our session being at 18, there'd be 1 or 2 on the team. So potentially what would probably happen is you would come on with somebody else who had already been on that team. That person was leading the team, and then you'd be there, and then they'd go off and you'd take over leading the team. And so it'd be kind of a rotational thing. 18 is a big number, a really big number. And if you've ever been in meetings with 18 people, it got a little long at times. And what happened was it turned into people just talking about their team. And what we ended up with was we had silos. So I was all just concerned about my piece of what I'm doing, and Susie was concerned about this, and Billy was concerned about this. And because our session meetings got so long, we never talked about where's the church going, that vision part. We had this vision team, and we kept going, what is it we're supposed to be doing? And why is this little group the one that's talking about where's the church going to go and what's going on? Why are we doing that instead of the elders of the church? So we talked about it on session, and that's when I got kind of moved into a second role, which was a reorganization team. And we started looking at where were we, what we were doing, what should we be doing. And where our church is different than almost any church in South Dakota, and many of the churches we belong to, is just purely our size. And because of our size, we have staff. We have a wonderful staff here. So what we came through as we had the discussions was, why are we having all these elders running these committees when we have this great staff here that is here every day, knows what's going on within their departments, and is in essence running things? They just need the direction on where we're trying to go. So when we went through the reorganization, that's what we kind of said is, let's let the staff be the staff. And therefore, we don't need a session of 18. And so the reorganization committee came back and said, we are proposing a session of 7. But those elders now will not have specific team responsibilities because we have staff that runs those. And the staff can staff those. There's still going to be teams. It's just the session elders won't be on those teams. And so that brought about the whole discussion of communication and how we make sure that the elders aren't separated from everything else that's going on, but they still know what's going on. But that way, our session meetings could be more directed to direction. And what is this church going to be? And what are the big needs of the church? And talk about that sort of things in a session meeting, as opposed to specific, what are we going to spend this $9 on for this, or they're $900 to do this, or what's this one person doing, or whatever. That the session now would be talking about the larger issues of this congregation and the direction this congregation should be going. And so we brought that forward. Lots of discussion, you can be assured about that one. This was a change, a huge change to the way we had done things previously. But after lots and lots of talk, and we tweaked some things, we did end up doing that, going to a session of 7. Since then, there was discussion that 7 seemed a little bit small, and there now are 9. And so there are three, we rotate every 3 years, so there's 3 elected every 3 years, or every year, and 3 rotate on, 3 rotate off. But so there's a session of 9 now, but the basic thoughts behind the reorganization of that we want session to be looking at the bigger issues and things going on in our church, the direction this church is going, and what do we need to do to make sure we're meeting where God is calling this church to be in this place, in this community. And that's more what the role of session is now, as opposed to individual teams as it was before. Color commentary over. Be glad to answer any questions if anybody's got any.
Could you, I'm sorry, make sure that the question person.
Paul, how much time did you cut off going from 18 to 9?
How much time?
Yeah, in other words.
Oh, well, initially not a lot, because all of a sudden now we're talking about other stuff. But no, the session meetings did get shorter. We were having 3.5 to 4.5 hour session meetings. It was painful, just really painful. I don't know how long the session, you guys have been on more recently. Session meetings 2.5 hours?
Ask Pat.
Pat, 2.5? 2? Yeah, so in half. Yes.
My question is, do you feel that with this reorganization that you have maybe empowered the staff to do what they do best without a lot of micromanagement from people that maybe are not involved as much as they are?
I think that was the whole thought, and I would say yes. It's dumb to think that session was going to sit there with 18 members and tell Kathy Dalma how to run children's ministry. Be serious. And so that allows the staff, who are the experts in their area, to do what they do. What's important in the way that we were doing this, though, was we needed to set a direction for where we're going. There's a Stephen Covey book, 7 Essential Things, and one of them is begin with the end in mind. And so that was session's responsibility to say, where are we going? We need to say where are we going and what direction we're going so that we can get everybody all moving in the same direction. And then given that direction of where we're going, then we can let the staff go and do their things under the umbrella of the direction that session has set is where we're going. Other questions? Okay. Turn it back over to you guys.
So this all happened just as I became clerk. They were just beginning to talk about reorg when I became clerk. Thanks, Joe. We're going to hand out something else. Did you all know that the Presbyterian Church USA has a constitution? Our constitution consists of 2 books. The Book of Confessions is a collection of statements of faith and belief. The Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed, the Heidelberg Catechism, the Westminster Catechism, Scots Confession, etc., etc., etc. If you want some interesting reading sometime, pick up a Book of Confession and read the Scots Confession. The other part of the Constitution is the Book of Order. This consists of how we're governed, how we worship. The first part is the F section, and that's foundations, and then there's the G section, that's government. Then there's the W section, and that's worship. And then the last one is the D section, which is discipline. If a pastor steps out of pastoral bounds, there's a whole section on how to discipline that pastor. I've never gotten deep into that section, for which I'm very grateful. The handout that you're getting right now is from the governmental section, the G section of the Book of Order, and it's the section that talks about session composition and responsibilities, as it says, G 3.0201. So the session is the council for the congregation. Council is the word that the PCUSA uses for the governing bodies. The GA is a council, the Synod is a council, etc. It's composed of persons elected by the congregation to active service as ruling elders, Together with all installed pastors and associate pastors, all members of the session are entitled to vote. That was an important part of that first paragraph. As I said before, once you're elected an elder, you're an elder for life, but then you are elected to session to serve for a particular term. Even when you go off session, you're still an elder. To be clerk, I had to be an elder. I served as an elder at a previous church. What else did I want to say? Ruling elder. Not too long ago, the Book of Order was redone, and they used then the terms ruling elder for non-pastoral elders, I can't think, lay elders, and they used the term teaching elders for pastors. That got a little confusing. It was confusing to me, so they've gone back to pastors or ministers of word and covenant or whatever the term is. But if you hear teaching elder, that refers to a pastor. If you use ruling elder, that refers to a lay elder. And that rule is not, I'm in charge and I lay down the rules. That's a measuring kind of rule, like a ruler. Yeah, the Presbyterian Church likes to get into words. Then the next thing I highlighted is the session has responsibility for governing the congregation and guiding its witness to the sovereign activity of God in the world, so that the congregation is and becomes a community of faith, hope, love, and witness. The session is the governing body, but as the governing body, it is also to provide a witness and to guide the congregation, lead the congregation. Again, not rule like a king rules or a queen rules, but guide. So in light of this charge, the session has responsibility and power too. There are three things. If you look on, there's A, B, and C. Provide that the word of God may be truly preached and heard. It is session's responsibility to oversee worship, to oversee the pastors, to oversee what they're preaching. If session feels like a pastor is going off the rails in theology, it's session's responsibility to pull that pastor back. We've never had to do that with Pat. She's wonderful. We've never had to do that with any pastor that I have ever served with. Then B is provide that the sacraments may be rightly administered and received. Every service of communion is authorized by the session. Here in this session, when I served, there was a calendar published, and on that calendar was communion the first Sunday of every month, and session authorized that calendar, and that authorized those services of communion. Usually Maundy Thursday was always also on there, probably Ash Wednesday. But if there's any special communion to be served, session needs to authorize that. I remember on session when Jen Sweer was youth director. Jen Sweer was a pastor. She wanted to take the youth on a retreat and wanted to serve communion there. She came to session and asked for authorization, and we voted to authorize that. So baptisms are authorized by the session. Weddings, we don't consider weddings a sacrament, but I want to insert here that weddings are also authorized by the session. The difference there is session doesn't say, yes, these two people may get married. Session says, yes, these people may get married in this building. We authorize the use of the building. We don't really talk about the people who are getting married at all. We might talk about the child being baptized, the family bringing it. There are guidelines on baptisms. They want baptism to be done in a service of community. So it's best if that child is a son or daughter of the church, of members of the church. Sometimes you'll have grandparents wanting their grandchild to be baptized. If you remember, when we do baptisms, the congregation makes a pledge to raise this child in the faith. Well, if that child is living in another city, it's a little harder to do that. Session is usually pretty generous with authorizing baptisms, but there is that consideration, at least, when baptisms are authorized. And then C, the third responsibility is to nurture the covenant community of the disciples of Christ. So again, session has a responsibility to, there's a whole list of things there. Looking over the roll, receiving and dismissing members. You don't become a member of our church without session authorizing you to become a member. And again, I can't imagine us ever turning down somebody who has to become a member, but it's something session has the power to do. So then G, 30202. Session has a particular responsibility to participate in the life of the whole church through participation in other councils. We are a connectional church. We have those presbytery synods and the GA that we are charged with participating in. Session has, what are we called? Not delegates, commissioners to presbytery. And I have served as a commissioner to quite a few presbytery meetings. It used to be that was rotated among the active session members. That gets hard because most presbytery meetings are on a Friday, and if the session member has a job, they have to take that day off. If that meeting is West River, they probably have to take 2 days off and get out there and then attend the meeting. So I've been sort of a permanent commissioner for the last few years. I would be happy if anybody else wanted to volunteer to go once in a while. The pastors are also commissioners there. The Presbyterian Church USA is a very, what shall I say, democratic church. We are not ruled by our pastors. We are not ruled by our ruling elders. All of those councils have representation from both lay people and ordained people, pastors. So we are in that way a democratic church. We also send, the presbytery then elects commissioners to GA. I am honestly not real sure how commissioners to synod get sent. Pat, is it elected by the presbytery? Oh, Cal's nodding. Cal's very knowledgeable about this stuff too. So that's that one. G0203, sorry. The session shall hold stated meetings at least quarterly. In Book of Order language, the word shall is an order. So session must meet at least quarterly. Our session usually meets once a month. I think most sessions of churches, the sessions of most of the churches we've been in since we've moved around the country a bit, have met once a month. A small church might decide to meet quarterly, I suppose. And then they can have special meetings if the moderator deems it necessary or if 2 members of session request it. Special meeting might come up because of some issue within the church or an emergency approval of a communion. Somebody wants to have communion at a funeral service and session needs to authorize it. So then there might have to be a special session meeting to authorize that. A special session meeting is dedicated to one topic, usually maybe 1 or 2. For whatever the special session meeting is called, that's what you discuss at that meeting. Nothing else should, in good order, come up. The other thing I highlighted in that paragraph is session shall provide by rule for a quorum for meetings. I believe back when the session was 18, a quorum was half plus 1 maybe? Do you remember, 10. Paul? 10? Okay. Right now with a session of 9, they have made we have decided, we the church, we the session, to make a quorum sort of a super quorum, and the quorum is 6. 7? 6.
I thought it was 7.
7. Sorry, I haven't been clerk long enough. I forgot some of these for a while. 7, so it's sort of a super majority. Session can meet without that quorum there, but they cannot make any decisions. You must have a quorum to make a decision. G 3.0204 is minutes and records. Minutes of the session must be kept. That's the clerk's job. Claire and I both have long experience with that. Claire, how long were you clerk? I'm guessing 9 or 10 years maybe. I think I was clerk 9 or 10 years. So yeah. So it's the responsibility of the clerk. Right now, I believe our session is operating without a permanent clerk. Each meeting, they find an elder to serve as clerk. A clerk must be an elder. They don't need to be an elder currently serving on session. So when I became clerk, I was not serving on session. Partway through my service as clerk, I was then elected to session. If you get really technical, I started out as a clerk to session, and when I became serving on session, then I was clerk of session. Again, the Presbyterian Church likes words. Copies, if you don't know this, copies of those minutes, the official copies are kept in a fireproof safe in Chandra's office. But there are also copies in binders in the church library. So if you ever want to go and read some minutes, there should be copies. I think they're kept behind the librarian's desk now. They're 3-ring binders full of lovely minutes written by Claire and me and Terry and some people before us. and after us. Session is also responsible to maintain a membership roll. In our church, that's mostly done by the membership team and Chandra. Chandra keeps it on the computer. There's also a lovely large book with everything written in it in hand, and she keeps that up. But every year, the clerk is asked to bring the membership roll and the book of minutes to a review committee. And so then that's all reviewed to make sure it's up to date and done decently and in order. Another good Presbyterian phrase. So as a clerk, it was fabulous to have Chandra keeping that written record up for us. Then they also keep registers. There are registers of baptism, as authorized by the session, of all ruling elders and deacons, of installed pastors, and any other registers as session may deem necessary. I believe we have a registers of weddings that have taken place in here. That's a wonderful resource for people who are researching their family. You know, I think my parents got married in your church. May I look through your register to see when their wedding was, or births, or baptisms, and all that kind of thing. Wonderful history and a resource for people doing that kind of thing. G 3.0205 is finances. Session has responsibility for finances if there is not a board of trustees. The board of trustees' job would be finances, but again, in our church, the session is in charge of that. Session prepares and adopts a budget. Session adopts the budget and approves the budget and then presents it to the congregation. If you remember from congregational meetings, the congregation does not approve the budget. The congregation receives the budget for information. It's session's responsibility to determine the budget for the year and determine the distributions of the congregation's benevolences. All special offerings must be authorized by session. So the children's offering is a regular offering, but if we, like the joy offering that we take at Christmas time, those denominational offerings, those all are authorized by session. Those are pretty much blanket things. In the past, I believe Honduras Vision Team has asked to do special offerings. We went to session and asked for approval of that. That's, again, so that session can be overseeing all finances, all contributions coming into the church. And then the session elects a treasurer. Again, in our church, that treasurer is a staff member right now, Jennifer Swanson. So that is a quick overview of our Constitution's explanation of the session's responsibilities. Any questions about any of that?
Just a quick question.
Judy Little.
Is this?
Oh, sorry.
That's
I
okay.
handed it to her upside down.
Is this going to be posted on the website, the church's website, for those watching from home? I mean, because this is better than wading through the books. The books are interesting, but, you know, for people that would like to kind of review some of this, since we don't have it on the screen
I
for
certainly
us.
could.
Yeah, that would be good. Thank you.
Judy Rops.
I just have a comment about the membership roll, because that's the committee that I'm a part of. A couple of years ago, we did some purging, I guess you would call it, of the membership roll, and I think that's actually it's supposed to be a requirement every year. And I know there was some discussion, because I think about 100 names were removed from the membership roll, and that was very concerning for people. But the membership committee worked very hard to make sure that the names that we were actually taking off of the roll were people that should be removed. They were people that had moved to California, people who joined another church and never took their membership off of our roll. So because we pay a membership due, when people are not attending or no longer, you know, like they've joined another church, we continue to pay for their membership, and it gets to be a pretty hearty sum every year. So that was just one comment that I wanted to make about membership.
Yeah, thank you, Judy, for bringing that up, because I forgot to mention per capita when I was talking about the overview of the denomination. All of those upper bodies, Presbytery, Synod, and GA, are funded by our per capita, what Judy referred to as a membership due. This year, I believe it's A little bit more than $34. $38? Okay. Okay, yeah. If you notice that funds the work of the Presbytery, the Synod, and the GA. I am currently a member of a GA committee overseeing ordination exams, and we have a staff member from GA that staffs our committee. We could not do our work without Tim. Tim is paid by our per capita. My expenses, if we travel somewhere, are not paid by per capita, but his expenses are, and we could not do our work without his organization and institutional knowledge and computer knowledge and all of that. So in my mind, it's a very worthy expense, and I'll just put in a plug here. If you can afford to pay your $38 for yourself, that saves the church budgets to pay for whatever our membership total is at the time. But if you can reimburse the church for that, that just frees up monies for other things. And interestingly enough, when Emily and Jacob joined a Lutheran church, I said, make sure you have the church email or write to our church to transfer your membership. And she said, I asked them to do that, and they said, that church won't transfer your membership. And I said, I am clerk of session, and I know we will transfer membership to a Presbyterian church. Some denominations will not, or to a Lutheran church, some denominations will not transfer their membership to our church, to our denomination, and we will transfer a membership to anybody. But sometimes people don't think of doing that, or a denomination or church doesn't think that it's necessary, or we will do it. So it's excellent work that the membership team does to very carefully purge the rolls. All right, another question?
Here on the first page, in the second paragraph at the very end, it is worded, and the 6 great ends of the church. What is that about?
Let me see if I can find them in the Book of Order. They are in the foundational part. Oh, that's chapter 2. They would be in chapter 1. The 6 great ends of the church are F 1.0304, the proclamation of the gospel for the salvation of humankind, the shelter, nurture, and spiritual fellowship of the children of God, the maintenance of divine worship, the preservation of the truth, the promotion of social righteousness, and the exhibition of the kingdom of heaven to the world. This statement came from the United Presbyterian Church of North America, which was the northern branch of the church during the Civil War, which united with the Presbyterian Church in the United States of America, which was the southern branch. They united in 1958. So it was adopted originally in 1910. So it's a foundational statement about what the what the church is about.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you. Joe's turn.
Okay. Before I get talking about how you become an elder, I wanted to just comment on one thing, and that is in that revisioning and designing of the session that Paul alluded to, and removing session members from the various committees. When Judy spoke up, it reminded me that we have now empowered a lot of other people to be in charge of those committees, and they are working as leaders, giving input to session in various ways, but that kind of spread the workload, and we have lots of natural leaders in our church who have taken over some of those committees, so thanks to all of you who are doing that. So, as far as how to become an elder, we have a nominating committee who does not report to session. They are a freestanding committee. It's made up of a slate of officers, a slate of folks who are chosen by the congregation to be on the nominating committee. It is their role to come up with a slate of officers who then need to be approved through a congregational meeting. I would first say that you might just be contacted by the nominating committee because they feel like you have the skill set to be an elder. That's not the only way that you can get their interest. If you have an interest in being an elder, you should definitely let the nominating committee know, because pretty sure they won't turn down your request. I think, though, before you even get to that point, I know from my experience, there's a couple things you need to think about, and that is the timing, if it's the right time in your life to do that, because this is a big commitment. You need to attend the meetings, or you're going to be left out in the dark as far as what conversations took place, what communications came out of those meetings. So it's important that you are ready to make that commitment to be a part of the session. And I think it's also important to be informed about what the session does. That's part of what we're trying to do today, just to, for anyone who comes from another denomination and isn't totally in the know about what our session does. But if you are interested in being on the session, there are lots of elders in our congregation who would be more than happy to visit with you about what those responsibilities are, their personal experience when they were on session. I think every session has a different experience. It depends on kind of what's going on in the life of the church at the time. When Claire and I were on session, we went through getting a new pastor, which that's an interesting time right there. But I think it's really important to be well informed as far as what the role of a session member is. And then if you are interested, like I said, if you're interested in being on the session, you should definitely let the nominating committee know, because they then will take that back to their committee, and that is how we come up with the slave officers. And like I said, then that group of people is approved by the congregation. I'm not aware in my time here since 1981 where at a congregational meeting someone said, no, they can't be an elder. That's never happened. But it is their role to make sure that they have the slate of officers that they want. Are there any questions about that? Okay, then Claire and I had decided when we were getting together to talk to you today about sharing just a little bit about our personal experience as an elder. And like I said, we joined the church in 1981. I didn't become a session member until sometime in the teens. And sat in church every Sunday and felt like I had a pretty good idea of what's going on here. And when I became a session member, I probably didn't say a whole lot the first year because I did not have a clue as to what all was going on in the church. So I think another reason to think about becoming a session member is just to get a better understanding of our congregation, of our Presbyterian faith, and just how things happened in a church our size. There are times when you have to make really tough decisions, and we went through that as well. Received letters of people, of someone who was very upset with what session was doing. And so you kind of have to let some of that roll off your back, because I felt like when I was on session, there was an amazing group of people who knew way more about the church than I did. But always, 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 it was kind of, I don't like to belittle the phrase, what would Jesus do? But a lot of times that's what it boiled down to, is scripture and what was the right thing, what is the right decision to do as far as whatever matter we were dealing with. I have never been a part of a church where the pastor is the deciding factor as to whether I stay in that congregation or not. You all are the reason I'm at First Presbyterian. This is our group of friends. It's the people we want to worship with. It's who we feel most comfortable with. And pastors come and go. And sure, there's times where maybe you aren't as happy with the pastor as you would like to be, but we kept coming back because this was our group of people we wanted to worship with. The other thing is that we did have a time where we had to make a decision, and I think this was fairly common knowledge, is we had an outside group using our church for their worship. And we were beginning to have more and more problems with damage done to the building. It was costing us money to fix plumbing and make repairs. And on one hand, what would Jesus do is Jesus would say, let them worship here. But on the other hand, we were the stewards for the finances for the church. And when we were putting more and more money into repairs, we had to come to a decision that maybe this relationship wasn't the best. And that was one time when I think all of us really pondered that. It was not a hasty decision. We let a lot of maintenance bills pile up until we could feel good about making that decision to cut that relationship. But that was a hard time. And you wanted these people to be able to worship in our facility, but not at the expense of being good stewards of our money. So I would, if you've never been on session, I think a lot of you in here have been already, so you know what it's about, but it was an amazing experience. It took me 3 years to feel like I even had a good clue as to what was going on, and then the next 3 years were feeling like I could be more a part of the discussions and just learning more. So that's my 2 cents worth.
2 details to add to what Joe said. A term of an elder, you're elected for 3 years, and then you have a chance to be re-elected for another 3 years. So that's the 6 years she was referring to. And the nominating team is charged with trying to balance session with male and female, hopefully some younger people along with some older people. That part gets especially challenging because a lot of the younger people have family responsibilities. But so there is some balancing that the nominating team has chosen with. And then I want to thank you, Joe, for bringing up that tough decision. I don't remember if I was a Clerk 2 session at that time or Clerk of session at the time, but that was a tough decision for us. I was first elected an elder when we lived in Illinois, and I sort of have Paul to thank for that because as I remember, they approached him and he said, well, my plate's kind of full right now. We had moved there not very long ago and he was just kind of getting settled in a new job. He said, you should talk to my wife. And the nominating team person said, oh yeah, she might make a good deacon. He said, no, she's cut out to be an elder, not a deacon. And so then they asked me and I said yes. And I will never forget my ordination. You go up front, you hear the words, you kneel down, all the elders in the church are called to lay hands on you, and when I turned around, I probably had tears running down my face. Such a powerful moment to see that cloud of witnesses behind me, physically behind me, and know that there were other witnesses everywhere else. It's just such a powerful experience. So very meaningful to me. Here at First Pres Sioux Falls, I was asked to be Clerk 2 session first by Charles to succeed Claire, and it was a pretty quick yes from me. I felt called to that position. I'm good with details. I'm pretty good on the computer, and you do the minutes on a computer, and so that was pretty good. Pretty easy to say yes to. Cal will attest to this. As Clerk 2 session, you're supposed to basically keep your mouth shut because you're not part of the body, and I had a lot of trouble with that. And as I had more and more trouble with it, I actually did talk to the nominating team and said, you know, I've been Clerk 2 session for a while. I really feel like I could serve on session also. And so then they nominated me, and I was elected to serve on session. Both in Illinois and here, I went through transition of pastors. That's not always an easy time for session because you're charged with overseeing worship. In Illinois, our pastor left quite suddenly and I was chair of the worship team. So I was in charge of finding pastors to preach each Sunday and all of that kind of stuff and drawing up the bulletin and all that little technical stuff, writing prayers of confession sometimes, finding a call to worship, all of that. As hard as that was at the time, I also found it very rewarding and to a certain extent fun. I discovered all sorts of resources out there. You don't really have to write it. You can find a resource and put it together. The first pastor I called for pulpit supply was alphabetical on the Presbyterians list of pastors that you could call. I can't remember his name right now. Paul, do you remember? Giacomo. I forget his first name, but Reverend Giacomo. He was probably at least 85. He looked like a little gnome. And when he came in that Sunday morning, I thought, how is he going to make it through worship? But when he got up front, the power of the Spirit came over him, and he was one of the strongest men ever. To do the children's sermon, we had like 3 steps up to a chancel, sort of like we do here. He came down those steps, and then he looked back, and he just fell back onto the step and nearly rolled all the way onto his back, and then came back up to do the children's sermon. And one of the longtime elders of that church came up to me and said, you probably did more ministry to Pastor Giacomo, we call him Giaco, Pastor Giaco, than he did to us that morning, asking him to preach again. So I didn't ask him to come back, but before too long we had an interim, and that took a lot of weight off of me. Here at First Pres, at FPC, it was just a good time to be. I was clerk 2 sessions during the reorg. That was really interesting to hear the discussion of that. I was clerk 2 sessions when the Good Samaritan Fund was proposed and adopted. That was an interesting discussion. It's just a really, really rewarding experience if you feel called to it and have those skills. Any questions? Okay, then I think we are done.
Well, thank you, Claire and Joe. I don't think we could have asked for anyone, both of you, better to explain all this. This was really very good. And next week, Pastor Nathan and Phil DeGroot will be continuing the discussion about other issues in the church. And do you have anything you'd like to add to that, Judy?
No, but this is about session, and we are going to be having classes on the deacons too, because they're another arm of the church that works and does. They're the more visible, and so just hang on. We'll have the deacons too.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.